numerous appearances. This is, of course, very understandable because in those days, during the time of Jesus, they had distinguished themselves as very respectable religious leaders. Jesus entered into that world and into that place where there were all kinds of different religious leaders who were already teaching about what it meant to be one with God. And in that world of ancient Palestine, some 2,000 years ago, he shared a message of salvation. And it's no surprise, is it, that as he goes about that work of testifying to his relationship with God and what it means to be with God, that these are the kinds of folks that he was going to encounter, the Pharisees and other religious leaders like them. Jesus wanted to say something of religious and spiritual significance, right? And so these are the common actors in that day and age that he was most likely to interact with. So what do we know about the Pharisees? Well, they were zealous. They were committed. They were sincere. They were dedicated. The word Pharisee actually means separated one. In their view, the best way to keep that covenant relationship with God, to make sure that they were holy and unblemished, was by separating themselves from unclean people, whoever they might deem those to be. And we can see this today in all kinds of religious separatist movements. Just imagine, if you will, the Amish. And the way that they huddle together in enclaves lest they be soiled or tainted by the outside world and all of the corruption that they believe lies beyond the bounds of their community. I'm not knocking the Amish here. There are many wonderful people who are Amish, but that is the reality of their belief system, right? And here lies one of the most common complaints that are often leveled against Jesus. That he was doing what? That he was eating and drinking and hanging out with people who were up to all kinds of no good. And if you're viewing Jesus' life and his ministry through the eyes of one of these Pharisees, you can see the question that they are going to ask. How in the world is he going to live a holy life like that by constantly being contaminated by people who were unclean? Well, when the Pharisee stood in the synagogue that day in our second lesson, he was feeling self-assured. So self-assured, in fact, that he had no trouble speaking ill of a fellow worshiper, a guy whose life was a complete mess. And yet he still humbled himself before God. As followers of Christ, we know where our loyalties lie. And we read a story like this, and we always want to be on the side of Jesus. When Jesus calls out to this Pharisee and calls him to account for his behavior and dislodges him from that pedestal upon which he has placed himself, we are quick to join in and say, "That's right, Jesus. You tell him." There is, of course, no place for an ego like that among the righteous. And yet, we're probably wise to dig just a little bit deeper, to recognize that the Pharisee in today's parable was actually a really, really exemplary man. This guy's behavior was so exemplary that he was beyond reproach. Let me give you some examples for your consideration. For one, fasting was required only on the Day of Atonement. And if you were a good Pharisee, then you would follow through by keeping that law. But here we read that this guy is a complete overachiever. You know the type. Not only does he fast on the Day of Atonement, he fasts twice a week. Or consider this, while tithing was required for some items that one possessed, this guy went over and beyond that by tithing a portion of everything that he obtained. The Pharisee that is envisioned in this parable is a good man. No, scratch that. He is a great man. And he's the kind of person that we would probably admire if we hadn't heard those stories about him as a child, how he stayed late after class, dusting all of the teacher's erasers. We hate people like that. What is it about our human nature that as soon as we see one who is beyond reproach, we begin searching for a way to, knock him down a peg? Ultimately, this passage is about humility. And more than that, it's a reminder that doing the right things is only part of the equation. To really be one with God, to be righteous, we need to do the right things. Of course, we all know that, but we also need to think the right things about our neighbors, about ourselves, about God. Such honesty and truth-telling is absolutely necessary if our lives are to fully reflect God's glory and grace. Here I want to transition and tell you about an article from the Washington Post. It was authored by a woman named Ashley Merriman, and she makes some pretty striking observations as we consider this topic of humility this day. Merriman writes, "The most humble rarely describe themselves as humble, because of course that seems arrogant to them. Yet studies have shown that they are not embarrassed, they are not humiliated, they are not ashamed. No, they are secure in their identity, and they are higher in well-being. True humility, scientists have learned, is when someone has an accurate assessment of both his strengths and his weaknesses, and he sees all of this in the context of the greater whole. A humble person is one who is a part of something that is greater than he. He knows that he is not the center of the universe, and he's both grounded and liberated by this knowledge. Recognizing his abilities, he asks how he can contribute. Recognizing his flaws, he asks how he can grow. Such individuals have a constant desire to learn and to improve. They embrace ambiguity and the unknown. They like getting new information. And we rejoice in the presence of people like this, those who are truly humble because they are wise and they are kind and they are generous. These are the folks who are pro-social. They build connections. They're more helpful and tolerant and sensitive and accepting of differences. They're desirable life partners, aren't they? And in positions of leadership, the humble prioritize the organization's success ahead of their own. Contrast all of that with the intellectually arrogant in our midst, those who are convinced that they have all of the right answers, certain that they've heard it all before. Folks like this are even threatened by new information. Those who are low in humility overreact during conflicts. They double down and they retrench. They strike out when angered. They plot their revenge. If they're the actual wrongdoers, well, they refuse to apologize or to accept responsibility. Instead, they blame their victims. A non-humble leader alone gets credit for the success, and he never makes mistakes. Someone else is always to blame. Followers carry out edicts rather than contribute new insights. Friends, we know what kind of people that we long to be. We know what kind of people Christ is calling us to be. Those who are not haughty or arrogant or rude. Those who do not insist on their own way, but rather those who rejoice in the truth. Sharing credit for our successes and owning up to our failures. And that is the message for us today. As we go from this place, that we might tell the truth about who we are and how God is calling us to ascend to that next level. That place where it's not all about us. That place where we will finally be one with God. May it be so, and all thanks be to God, both now and forever. Amen. I invite you